again. My name is Maria KOROLOV. I'm the editor of MetaStellar, which is all about speculative news and fiction, and the editor of HYPERGRID Business, which is all about enterprise uses of virtual environments. And here we have a special guest to talk with us today, Anders Gronstedt, the founder of the Gronstedt Group, a consultant who specializes specifically in enterprise AI, enterprise VR applications. Thank you for coming to be with us today, Anders.
Oh, thank you, Maria. This is so special. You and I go back from the Second Life days.
I know, we've been doing this for what, like over a decade now?
Yeah, I know. So I feel like the dreams we had back then are finally coming to fruition now. We can just strap on the mobile headset and step into the world.
All right. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to ask you about, if you're interested in talking about it, is enterprise use cases for virtual reality. So we've been hearing about virtual reality for ages, but does it actually work? Do companies actually see any benefit in it other than some profile, some pilot projects where they show it off to the media and they say, oh, look what all the cool stuff we're doing in VR, but then you follow up and nothing really comes of it.
Right, yeah.
So what do you say?
So we position VR as the flight simulator of any type of training. And while there certainly are use cases in things like soft skills and leadership, the low-hanging fruit for sure is in procedural training where you need to use your hands and your feet, and you need to look around, you need to walk around, and where the stakes are high, if there's safety implications, or you're working on very expensive equipment, for instance, that's where VR is just a no-brainer. And of course, there are some industries that lend themselves particularly well for this. So lately, most of our work has fallen into the two verticals of pharma, where we do lab training. And I'd like to show you some examples of that, where you're physically in a lab and you're grabbing syringes and bottles and you're taking fluid from one container to another, doing aseptically correct behavior and gowning well and all is important. And the other one is construction related. So we work with Daikin, the big HVAC company, and we're developing a recruitment training for, or recruitment VR program for the painting and drywalling industry for the International Finishing Trades Institute. And for alarm.com, we're doing training on how to install industrial alarm systems. So obviously, on the construction side, there are dangers, and you need to practice things over and over, build that muscle memory. And it's kind of funny, you know, we would never fly on a plane that where the pilot was taught via e-learning and PowerPoints, and nor would airlines have pilots fly around in full-scale planes to practice. They go straight from the simulator to flying planes. And I think that's a mindset we need to adopt in industries, where instead of throwing people out on construction sites and expensive pharma labs and having them learn there at high expense, and it's hard to have someone provide instantaneous feedback, you can just throw on a mobile headset for a few $100s and practice it over and over. It's obviously not going to replace doing it on site, but it can cut down the time significantly.
Can you talk me through a common example of how they used to do the training in the past, and how you would do the training in VR, and what the advantages are of doing it in VR?
Right. So with all of our pharma clients, they have similar use cases where they have these expensive labs and they're dealing with tasks that have life and death consequences. So for Novartis, the pharma company, for instance, they have this unique genetically modified process where they draw blood of kids with leukemia, and they modify the blood in the lab for 10 weeks. And so they're dealing with actual patient blood of kids who are on the last leg. And so training that in physical labs, which usually requires actual blood, not patient blood for training, but actual blood still. And you need an instructor to be right there watching over their shoulder, comes at a very high expense, and you don't get to practice that a whole lot. So we developed this simulation where you get to practice this over and over, and then you're completely prepared when you obviously go into that physical lab to do one last practice round with a live instructor before working on the real thing.
So how does that work? Does it know where your hands are and you're holding up like virtual beakers or AR beakers? I mean,
right.
What does that look like?
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, let me take you inside of what one of these things look like.
Oh,
so,
what kind of headset do you have there?
So this is the Oculus Quest, which retails for $299 in the consumer headset, and I'll encourage everyone to get it. Anyone can put it on an expense account, surely, and even just playing some games. And in fact, we have the demo environment I'm going to show you here. We can send to your headset so you get to experience it. The business version is $800. There are a few other competitors, but this is the market leader. And it's completely mobile. So I actually have a cord here just for the screen share, but you don't need to hook up to a PC normally. Everything is contained in the headset. And you can do multiplayer, which I think is a real breakthrough for VR in this way. Multiple people physically remote can get together in the same environment. So yeah, let me do a quick, because it's so hard to describe this without actually demonstrating it. So I'm now gonna put on the headset, and I'm gonna show you my hands. So these are my hands. So they're hand controllers physically that I'm holding on to, but in the virtual world, we have modeled real hands, and you have the sensation of actually being in here, looking at your real hands. Put the thumbs up here. And I'm going to show you some tasks here. So what we typically do to train people from scratch, who don't know what task is, we have a tutorial that shows exactly what to do, a video tutorial played inside of VR. And so you look at this tutorial. In this step, you're watching a tutorial of what you're going to do next. And you're supposed to grab this spray bottle, disinfect your hand. And as I'm spraying my hand here, you can notice the coloration change. It gets darker, and I will have a sensation of it's being wet. And with time, it gets a lighter color again. And while I'm spraying my hand here, I can spray my other hand here too, I actually feel vibration in both hands. The hand controllers are vibrating. I hear the sound of a spray bottle coming from the direction where I'm spraying. I can grab a wipe here. I can spray it. And so again, I'm looking at the video tutorial that shows me exactly what to do. I'm using my hands here to do these various steps. I can do something like picking up a bottle here with one hand, picking up the syringe with the other hand. I know it looks a little weird that the hands disappear when I do this, but it's a very natural feeling of actually holding the bottle and syringe. And I can insert it. And the instructions here tell me to draw 2 milliliters. So I have to get a real close look of it. Get to the 2 milliliters, and ta-da! And then the next tutorial is queued up. It's telling me to put this medication in this bag here. So again, just using my hands and hand controllers. Ta-da! I just finished that. And I can look around in every direction here. There's a fire safety cabinet for much of the training takes place. So I have this complete sensation of actually being in this lab. I can physically walk around here in the lab, can move my hands and reach out and grab and interact with things. That's just the magic of VR. And then on top of that, you can have multiplayer meeting. I could, in fact, if I turn on that, I can set up a multi-user connection, and I can have an instructor pop in and tell me what to do. So yeah, let me hop out of VR.
All right. So you talked about the laboratory training use case.
Yeah.
What about the construction use case? I mean, if you're walking around a construction site, walking around in VR is kind of problematic. Right.
So you use the you can physically walk around in a smaller space, and then you use on the hand controller here the thumbstick typically to locomote yourself around. And most of our programs take place in a fairly confined space. There certainly are some tasks where you do need to move around a lot. But so right now we're working on a drywalling training, for instance, where you're grabbing a big tape bazooka. So you're mixing the mud and you're grabbing the tape bazooka and you take a few steps physically towards the wall and you put the bazooka towards the wall and you drag drag it down to take the wall with the drywall and there's a flat box that you use after that. So you have these really, it's probably the most fun program we've done because the pharma one is a lot of intricate little syringes and bottles, but the construction site like this, particularly when it comes to drywalling, and these giant two-handed tools that you get to play with, and really get a sense for what the job is like. And that's the purpose of this one, is as a recruitment tool to give people an idea of what the job is all about.
So do companies have like a room set up for VR where people do this, or can people like clear off space in their living rooms and do it there?
Yeah, so there are all kinds of models. I just came back from a big event where we had 16 headsets set up in 8 different play areas, 8 different squares where people got to try them out. We have these clean boxes, of course, to clean the headsets between each use and disposable covers on them. So it can be done at a large event in an expo setting. It can be a lot of our pharma clients, they will have a dedicated training room where they've cleared out chairs. You typically want the physical space to be as big as the space that you're training in. So for our pharma clients, the lab, actual lab environment is usually fairly small. So the training environment is typically the same size. So that way they can physically walk around and don't have to use a thumb controller to move things on. But of course, you can do, actually right now we're working on a program that in real life, you're sitting down on a chair to do it. And so we're creating it as a seated experience where you sit down physically on a chair and use your hands to do it. So it can be as small as that.
Now, when I've done games or simulations where I've had to walk around inside the game, either by using my hand controller to indicate movement or by stepping in place and stuff like that, I get nauseous pretty quickly.
Yeah,
And
that's
is it
true.
just
Yeah.
me?
Yeah, no, that's it's true. And there are some tricks around it, which is why we typically have the space fairly confined and try to minimize how much you need to locomote yourself around. And there are some tricks visually you can kind of play with, having sort of a tunnel that you go through. So that there are some ways around that, where you can merely click on the ground and as it can fade to black and fade out. There are some tricks like that.
Like click to teleport?
Mitigate. Yeah, right.
And do you build everything from scratch? Do you use like pre-made environments like Second Life where their assets are already available, or do you build in like 3D modeling programs or something like Unity?
Yeah, the later. So for what we call real VR, 6 degrees of freedom where you're moving around, you have to be able to look at things in different angles, and you have room presence, you're physically walking around, hand presence, you're using your hands to interact with objects. That has to be developed in a real-time game engine. And of course, Unreal and Unity are the 2 market leaders. We happen to develop most of our work in the Unity game engine. And there certainly are some things we can reuse from project to project. And there are some assets, if you want something very generic, like a plant or a chair that you can get. But for the most part, what we develop is ground up developed in various 3D programs, like the Autodesk suite, and then imported into Unity. And some clients will have 3D assets that they will send us, like CAD models, which is good for reference, but and there's a lot of talk about the ability to just import those. But I tell you that with these mobile headsets that are low powered, everything has to be compressed to the point where it's easier for us to just develop it from scratch. So we have a team that are well versed in developing for the mobile headset.
So I've seen some data that this is projected to be a big growth industry, but I've been seeing that data for a few years now.
Yeah, I know. Isn't it funny? 5 years ago, we were all going to walk around with AR headsets, and yeah, the timeline has been a little slower. But I think it's like with any innovation, we tend to overestimate how fast it will be here, but underestimate the power of change So it's going to be here. The cousin augmented reality for sure has a long way to go still. I'll argue that virtual reality is mature enough now that most large companies we work with are already using it at scale, and the cost is really coming down, both for the hardware and these game engines to develop them in, making it accessible for relatively smaller developers like ourselves to develop something that looks absolutely photorealistic and looks almost like a professional game when you step into it.
And finally, I want to know, has the pandemic accelerated things or slowed things down?
So it was interesting. You would have thought that it would have accelerated it. We actually had a lull during the first year, only because I think companies were just panicking and they didn't want to do anything more innovative. They were just back to basics of just doing this type of Zoom calls and traditional e-learning. But in the last half year now, we've seen a literal explosion here of projects and work. So it's coming back, and obviously the whole work from home is a huge driver of virtual reality. Access to headsets, of course, from people's home is still an issue. As cheap as they are, most people don't have their own headsets. So most of our clients still have some type of a shared model where you go into a location to share VR headset with other people.
Mm-hmm. I've also heard vendors pitch a virtual office space and virtual meetings.
Yeah.
And personally, I've tried those, and in a VR headset, you can't see your calendar, you can't take notes,
I know.
you can't see a keyboard.
Yeah, a lot of those things that you don't realize until you get
Even
there.
if you have a virtual screen coming up in the headset, it's really hard to read. If you've got a pass-through camera, the video quality is awful.
Yeah, you've seen Mark Zuckerberg being out on the morning shows pitching that idea. And his main argument is, it's spatial, so you can see what direction people are standing at, and there's some truth to that. But is that enough of a benefit to equip everyone with the VR headset? Where it makes sense is if you're working on a prototype new car or HVAC equipment, and you want to walk around and crawl around, and for that, obviously, if you have a shared 3D experience that makes sense for the conversation, it makes perfect sense. But yeah, I agree with you. Just sitting down to have a regular old meeting or brainstorm session, there's not enough value yet in VR. It's going to get there though.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking time to talk to us. Is there anything else you want to add about business use cases before we go?
So one of our big learning points in this last year here is the power of multiplayer VR. So still most VR experiences are the single player experiences, and they're powerful enough. You usually have sort of self-paced tutorials, and it will stop you in the action and you get to redo when you get something wrong. So there's a lot of value to the self-paced. But the real value is when you have multiple people, maybe from all over the world, put on the VR headset, maybe an instructor will log on via PC, and you're all in there together and you see each other. It looks kind of funny if you haven't seen multiplayer VR. It's typically just a floating head and two floating hands, because these are the only things that you're actually tracking in space. But it totally sells you on the idea that you are there together with each other. And so, yeah, we talked about just sitting down for a meeting. That's not a very good use case, but there's so many examples of, say, an instructor demonstrating a task, or if you want to visualize a product or something, and being able to do all that together. Say a sales rep want to take a customer around a big product and having X-ray vision to see what it looks like inside, or a design meeting or something like that, or in a pharma lab teaching skills. The multiplayer is just a super, just a real game changer for virtual reality.
All right, I had to put you on mute there because I don't know if you can hear. My dog heard a delivery van coming, and he was like, "Oh no, the delivery van!"
Did you want me to repeat it, or?
No, I just put myself on mute. That's why. We're all working from home these days, aren't we?
I know.
The new normal.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to thank you very much for joining us, and we're going to be back to talk about the best headsets to use for this, and you can show us some of the headsets and talk us through the advantages of them, and then we'll talk about the costs and the time it takes to deploy one of these projects. So thank you very much for joining us. I look forward to seeing you back for the next segment. Thank you.